upon what may possibly be the most significant election in the history of our nation. There have been many questions. There's been a lot of speculation concerning the role of God's people in the events transpiring about us today. And this study of the role and relationship of God's people with their government, I hope, will be something that helps clarify some of these matters for God's people. We concluded the last time with this following inspired statement, a statement containing a warning that has been misunderstood and also been misapplied by so many today. And I want us to go back and look at this quotation. It comes from the Fundamentals of Christian Education, and it says, "The Lord would have his people bury" what? Political questions. Now we're going to be looking at the meaning of some of these words. We cannot with safety vote for political parties, for we do not know whom we are voting for. We cannot with safety take part in any political schemes. So you see there's 3 times that this political is used here. Goes on and says, we cannot labor to please men who will use their influence, notice for what? To repress religious liberty and to set in operation oppressive measures to lead or compel their fellow men to keep Sunday as the Sabbath. The people of God are not to vote to place such men in office, for when they do this, they are partakers with them of the sins which they commit while in office. This statement, though explicitly forbidding involvement in political questions or political parties, or knowingly supporting or voting for an individual who would suppress religious liberty or seek to institute Sunday laws, is oftentimes distorted to mean we become partakers of any sin committed by any person we vote for while they're in office. And it's amazing how many times over the last several decades I've heard this. But this position requires tremendous departure from both the intent and the very language of the statement, as well as denial of clear biblical doctrines. There are 4 things I want you to see here. We become partakers of sins of others only as we participate in those sins, condone those sins, refuse to oppose them, or refuse to condemn them by our silence. So we become partakers. I want us to look at this. When we participate, when we condone them, when we refuse to oppose them, or when we refuse to condemn them by our silence and inactivity. We must speak out against wrong wherever and whenever that wrong arises. And as such, the warning that we become partakers with them of their sins which they commit while in office must be understood in the sense of seeking to place someone in office knowing that that individual will seek to enact laws contrary to divine principle. Then we become partakers. Laws that restrict religious freedom, laws that destroy the sanctity of marriage, or promote intemperance, or encourage immorality, or destroy the unborn. If we do not speak out, we become partakers by our silence. We saw that this is possible, that it is possible that by refraining from seeking to prevent such individuals from obtaining office, that we become partakers of their sins by our silence, by our refusal to engage. And being partakers with them of their sins has no application whatsoever to their personal lives, nor to political issues. Forget the political issues, forget the politics, and consider their platform as pertaining to the principles of righteousness. Not that these individuals are righteous themselves, but that their governance tends to preserve righteous principles. These are the things to consider. This principle is further evidenced by the following. Those who by their votes sanction the liquor traffic will be held accountable for the wickedness that is done by those who are under the influence of strong drink. Do you see that? We are to vote against intemperance. And here specifically, she's talking about alcohol. If we do not vote to stop it, or if we vote to promote it, we become partakers of that sin itself. So again, notice this one. We are to oppose Sunday laws by pen and vote. Now notice, it doesn't say riots and insurrection like so much of our country is involved in today. We are to oppose it by pen and vote. I do hope that the trumpet will give a certain sound in regard to this Sunday law movement, and we'll talk about that in just a few moments here. So in light of the inspired counsel, each of us must make up our own mind after individual consideration of the issue of our relationship as well as our role in government. And this must be done in the light of our own study of inspiration. Our view in regard to public affairs must be molded by biblical principles and our understanding of prophecy, including our philosophy of history. We have nothing to fear for the future, except we forget the Lord's leading in our past history. It is clear that with regard to voting, it is appropriate for us to exercise the duties in regard to voting, but only as we have been disciplined to understand the bearing of important questions. We saw this the last time we were together. And as previously stated, we should never vote for a particular person based upon that candidate's looks, personality, charisma, race, gender, religion, and the list can go on, or even because he or she is liked or disliked. Those things should never, ever play into leadership of any nation or of any position anywhere. But people want to vote because, oh, she's a woman, we need a woman. Well, the world needs women, but they need women with a little smarts if they're going to do something. Or, oh, well, we need a black person, or we need an Indian person, or we need a conglomerate of a person that's mixed up of all of those. Or we need a good-looking guy like Bill Clinton. You know, it's amazing how many women voted for Bill Clinton because of his good looks and charisma. These are just things that enter into this. Not only is such action ludicrous, it is also sinful, for it is contrary to all inspired counsel and thus in blatant opposition to God himself. Historically, two very significant things were happening in the year 1888. We're about to conclude a 13, 14-part study on that. Two important things were going on in that year. One was in the realm of religion and biblical truth, and the other in the arena of politics, which would impact religious freedom. One was what the Lord's messenger referred to as a most precious message, sent to the church through Christ's delegated messengers, that's her words, Elder A.T. Jones and E.J. Waggoner. And it's sad indeed that when God sent this most precious message to his people to prepare the way of the Lord, it was unbelievable what actually took place. It was to prepare the way of the Lord, we're told, and to close the work of the third angel. But this message was despised and the light resisted. Thus the special power of the Holy Spirit in latter rain measure, which would have enabled us to carry the truth to the world as the apostles did on Pentecost, was now kept from them. The other notable occurrence in 1888 was the Blair Bill. The Blair Bill was before the United States Senate. This bill was pressing for a national Sunday law in this nation, and God once again was using A.T. Jones as he appeared before the United States government in opposition to this unconstitutional endeavor. Now, were we as a people involved in politics then? Come on, it's not a trick question. He wouldn't have been before Congress if he hadn't been. He wouldn't have had the support of the prophet if we hadn't have been. Wouldn't have had the support of the leadership if we hadn't have been. We were involved in some political issues there. We can't deny that. There are two documents, and this is also in, I want you to see something that White wrote during this. I think that it would be best if our in our papers the subject of the perpetuity of the law of God were made a specialty. We should now be doing our very best to defeat this Sunday law. Now, this is the prophet of the Lord addressing a real significant issue. Here's what I want you to see. I'm going to give you two of these, and this address is in your bulletin. And this is the National Sunday Law argument of A.T. Jones before the United States Senate, and that's the website that you can go to, and like I said, it's in your bulletin. And the other one is the Blair Sunday Rest Bill, which is at that website. You can look both of those up and read them in their entirety. These events were developing at the very time that God sent a message to his people to prepare the way of the Lord and close the work of the third angel and begin the loud cry of the fourth angel. But because the church despised the men and the message that they bore, and by rejecting the message given at Minneapolis, men committed sin, God could not accomplish his desire for Jesus to come. That's why we're told several times the Lord could have come ere this, but we stopped him from coming. And consequently, we were not prepared for the National Sunday Law. You do know that that law will take place before Jesus comes. And the stage was set 136 years ago for it to happen. But we weren't ready. Again, it must be stressed that God's people must not link themselves with any political party. God employs the strongest figures to show that there should be no union between worldly parties and those who are seeking the righteousness of Christ. We received many warnings against being involved in these political issues or activities, and I want to look at a couple of these. Whatever the opinions you may entertain in regard to casting your vote in political questions, you are not to proclaim it by pen or voice. Wow. We're going to see something very strong here. Our people need to be silent upon questions which have no relation to the third angel's message. We are not, as people, to become mixed up with political questions. I remember last week we kind of concluded with the difference between political questions and questions dealing with morality and ethics. So we see that there is something very significant that God wants us to be aware of in the realm of politics. Watch this. While we are in no wise to become involved in political questions, yet it is our privilege to take our stand decidedly on all questions relating to temperance reform. Concerning this, I have often borne a plain testimony. So, political questions, leave it alone. Moral, ethical questions, God's people are required to take a stand on it. If they do not, their silence condemns them. I would like to take a few minutes now just to review something from our previous study. As we saw, there's a tremendous difference between political questions and biblical, moral, and ethical issues. For example, political issues that we looked at: foreign policy, Social Security, trade, budget, business and labor. These are all political issues that we should not be involved in. We have elected officials that deal with those things. But then we find gun control, minimum wage, health care, taxes, infrastructure, political issues that we leave with the government to take care of. We need not get involved in these. But there was one that we looked at that I brought to question, and that is immigration. Is immigration political, or is it a moral, ethical issue that needs to be addressed? Is immigration a political issue, or does it fall under moral and ethical issues? And what are some of the moral and ethical dangers when dealing with immigration? I want you to see why it falls under both categories here. First of all, moral and ethical dangers of uncontrolled immigration. First of all is human trafficking. Is that a problem? It's unbelievable how so many, not just adults, but young children are being sold into human trafficking through this type of a process. A second one is extortion. These poor people give everything they've got to get up here, and some of them don't even get here with their lives. The extortion is horrendous. Drug smuggling. Drug smuggling that falls under the temperance thing. You do realize that. Falls under temperance. Drug smuggling is a problem. Unrestrained entrance to criminals, gangs, and cartels that we see come in and take over entire complexes, and in some cases even cities. And kidnapping, rape, and murder. These all abound because of this problem that we're facing, that we need to be speaking up about. A sixth one is increase in drug-related deaths. More people are dying from drugs today than ever before in the history of this country. And we must speak out against this. The seventh one is many segments of society become unsafe. Some of them are extremely dangerous to even live in. Extremely dangerous. And then we also find that the drain on national resources, such as our medical, educational, employment, and housing. Funding is being taken from those who need it in this country to be given to people who are not citizens of this country, and it's destroying our economy. So these are just some of those issues. So this is what I want us to see. Biblical, moral, and ethical issues. First of all, above everything comes God's law. Then we find religious freedom. And on top of that, Sunday legislation. The fourth one would be temperance. That's drugs, alcohol, or any of those things. Number 5, the sanctity of marriage. Friends, that's not a political thing. The politics have gotten into it and have destroyed the sanctity of marriage. Immorality abounds today. I don't know how we can get any more like Sodom and Gomorrah than what we already are. And then we find also the right to life. And finally, this one, family values. Where have they gone? And what have we done to prevent it? And what can we do to do that? These issues are not what the Lord was referring to when he said through his servant in 1899 that every teacher, watch this, minister, or leader in our ranks who is stirred with a desire to ventilate his opinions on political questions should be converted by a belief in the truth or give up his work. That's strong. That's very strong. Leave the political questions away. Deal with the moral, the biblical, the ethical issues that God's people must face in an evil, evil world. But what are we doing? Do we actually have people dismissed from their positions because of what they're doing in the realm of politics? Notice this one. God calls upon the teachers in our schools not to become interested in the study of political questions. Now, I want you to understand here that this stands in stark contrast to some teachers in some of our schools, and one in particular I'm thinking of about a decade ago, telling their classes on repeated occasions such things as this: if Trump becomes president, he will gather up all your friends and families and deport them. That was a decade ago. They're still saying the same thing today. And a decade ago, did he do it? So I want us to just see how lies are interwoven so much in this political realm. They also, a teacher, one of our schools right here in our area, compared Trump's book, Make America Great Again, with Hitler's book, Mein Kampf. Those, I'm going to use the Greek word, morons, don't even know what they're talking about. They probably never read the book, and by the way, they shouldn't. It's sheer madness throughout that book. Comparing Make America Great Again with Mein Kampf, or comparing Donald Trump with Nazis. Now, I'm not talking about the current time. I'm talking about over 10 years ago. I seriously doubt that these supposed educators even understand what the word Nazi means. Most people today don't. They just think it's a bad thing. Well, at least many of them do. There's others that think it's a good thing and try to bring back a neo-Nazism. But the word Nazi carries a very, very negative connotation. And that, my friends, is why they use that word. Yet I would venture to say the vast majority of people today don't even know the true and original meaning of Nazi. Nazi is an acronym. That's all it is. It's an acronym for the National Socialistic government before the time of Hitler. In English, it is simply National Socialism. That's the meaning of the word when you break it into English. The full meaning is National Sozialistische Deutsche Arbeiter Party. That's the meaning of the acronym. The Nazi Party was founded in 1920. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of historical information so that you know what people are talking about and you know truth from error and why they say what they do in the way they do. It was founded by a man by the name of Anton Drexler It was not founded by Adolf Hitler, as many falsely believe. He was only a member of the Nazi Party. It grew from less than 60 members in 1920 to over 8.5 million by 1945, once Hitler took control of the party. In January 1933, Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany. That same year, he and his henchmen, such people as Hermann Goering and Adolf Eichmann and Heinrich Himmler and Joseph Goebbels and others, opened the first Nazi concentration camp, 1933. Now, you do understand that that is several years before the Second World War. It was opened in Dachau, which is a little town to the northeast of Munich in southern Germany. Most of it was simply to put his political opponents away. But over the next 12 years, they would open another 1,000 death camps in 12 years. In November, on the 9th of November, 1938, this is a year before the beginning of the Second World War, the year before the invasion into Poland. Something called Kristallnacht took place. Kristallnacht simply means crystal night or the night of broken glass. That night, hundreds of homes and businesses were vandalized and burned, while Nazi officials ordered the police and firefighters to do nothing as the riots raged and buildings burned. Does this sound familiar today? You see, 6 years of Nazi Party rule under Hitler eventually, the following year, ignited World War II. Now, Nazism shared many elements with Mussolini's fascism. There's another word you hear thrown around today, fascism. What are they talking about? Nazism became more extreme than fascism, but both ideas and practices. But what is fascism? I want us to consider this. It is another term being indiscriminately used today. Have you heard of a group called Antifa? You know what Antifa stands for? Anti-fascism. Antifa, anti-fascism. Now, let's compare their profession with their actions. They are opposed to fascism, supposedly. Fascism was instituted by Benito Mussolini in 1915. So almost, while that First World War was coming down toward an end. 1915, and it actually refers to, among other things, ruling by force and often violence, as well as suppressing opposition and criticism, and is often very prominent in promoting racism. That's what fascism was and still is. A fascist state is one ruled by one party who seizes power forcefully or achieves power by eroding democratic institutions. Is this not the very actions of Antifa today? It's quite a contradiction to the profession of their name. Fascism outwardly transformed the entire nation of Italy and widened it into a creation of a one-party state, which claimed to penetrate all facets of life, whether the economy, education, leisure pursuits, or the family and private life. Again, does it sound familiar with what's happening today? As we leave our semantical and historical consideration of these two political or terms, structures, Nazism and fascism, hopefully we will be leaving it with a better understanding of what they are or why they are so politically charged today, and though often perverted in order to stir up strife and opposition. So again, although Nazism simply referred to National Socialism because of the negative and revolting connotations conjured up by this word, many in the political, the educational, the media arena are using it to attack, to demean, to distort, to divide, and destroy both individuals and ideas. But there are three other words I want us to look at that are also being thrown around out there today that many don't really know what they're really all about. They're tossed around in the political realm, words like Marxism, communism, and socialism. What is meant by those things? We hear the words, but do we really know what's behind it? Marxism, in simple terms, is a social and political theory that argues that society's primary conflicts stem from a struggle between the wealthy class and the working class. Does this sound familiar? What's happening today? Share the wealth. We'll see something here interesting. Its theory is that this struggle will eventually lead a worker revolution within the nation and a communist society where everyone shares the wealth equally will arise. It emphasizes the importance of economics in shaping society, with class struggle as the driving force behind the social change. The ultimate goal of Marxism is a communist society where the means of production are owned by the people collectively, eliminating all class distinctions and ensuring equal access to resources for everyone. Equal, whether they work or not. Today, Marxism, also referred to as communism, is the ideology of the ruling parties of, there's 5 nations out there that are still communist. 5 different nations. China is one. Cuba is another. Laos is one. Vietnam is another. And North Korea all fall under one-party socialist politics. Many other communist regimes have collapsed over the years. The most notable of those was, which one do you think? The Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union, which came to its end on December 25th, 1991. But we still think of Russia as communist, but it's not considered communist. A lot of communist and socialistic concepts, but it is not a communist country. So, as we look at communism now, it should be noted that Marxism and communism are not the same thing. Remember that. Marxism is a philosophy, while communism is a system of government based on Marxist principles. So you see the distinction between the two. Marx envisioned a society in which workers own the means of production, but in the real world, however, communism is the government owns the means of production and everything else. You can see why there was such a stir about that in the 1950s following the Second World War, with all of the communist things that were going on in this country from about 46 on up into the mid-50s. The basic premise of communism is that wealth is to be shared equally It's based on the idea that everyone should share the benefits of labor and that private property and social changes or classes should be eliminated. Is there a move for that today? All you have to do is listen or watch. I want you to see some things, characteristics of communism now. First of all, is ownership. One of the characteristics is ownership. In other words, the state owns the major resources in society, including property, means of production, education, agriculture, and transportation. Sound familiar? A second point is distribution. Communism says wealth is divided among citizens equally or according to an individual need. So the government controls all resources and all finances, all wealth, and they're supposed to distribute it equally. The third point, the government is a single authoritarian party controlling the political and economic systems. And the fourth characteristic is opposition. Communism is opposed to democracy and to capitalism. These are some key points. So now moving from Marxism through communism to socialism, and this is the other word that's tossed around, we have people that want to make this a socialistic nation. Socialism is a political and economic system where the community, rather than individuals, owns and manages property and the means of production. The goal of socialism is to create a more equal society by distributing the wealth equally among all people. So you see there are some very close similarities between Marxism, communism, and socialism, but they are different. Socialism is based on the idea that public ownership of resources leads to a better distribution of wealth and a more classless society. Socialism is often confused with communism, but the two are related political and economic systems that share many similarities. Both reject capitalism in favor of wealth equality, public control of the means of production, and economic power for the working class. So these politically charged, slanderous misrepresentations of truth are not limited in the particular teachers or schools alone that I referred to previously. They are prevalent throughout our entire educational system, from elementary through university, both in the church and in the world. These sentiments are promulgated and encouraged on all sides, even by professed Christians. So this stands in opposition to this statement. Those who teach the Bible in our churches and our schools are not at liberty to unite in making apparent their prejudice for or against political men or measures. We're not at liberty to do this. Thus, those teachers in the church or in the school who distinguish themselves by their zeal in politics should be relieved of their work and responsibilities without delay, for the Lord will not cooperate with them. The correct application of these and similar statements hinges on an accurate meaning of the terms political and politics. Webster's New International Dictionary defines these this way: politics, the science and art of government. So that's what politics are. But we also see that political is of or pertaining to polity or politics, or the conduct of government, or of pertaining to those who make a business of politics or politicians in their partisan activities, as he is actuated by merely political questions. You see, that's why we're told to leave that alone and not be caught up in those things. The Encyclopedia of Social Sciences gives us this definition: politics frequently has unpleasant connotations. The use of the term in the bad sense implies a milieu hospitable to scheming and manipulations. See why we are to leave them alone, my friends. Did Ellen White now intend to condemn only partisan strife and scheming or dishonest manipulations? Or did she also intend to discourage orderly exercise of the vote and a serious study of political science? We have another step we have to go as we look at what the prophet had to say in this area of politics, in the area of political, and in the area of voting. What did the prophet really say, and what was the position of our pioneers way back when? And I would encourage you to study some more on that. And we're going to pick it up at this point the next time as we look, and I quoted this before, and I want to just share it to you again. Excuse me a minute, I want to go down for a minute. This is what we're going to look at next week. Those of our people who voted at all at the last presidential election, to a man, voted for Abraham Lincoln. Why? We're going to pick it up and look at why that was and what our position was as a people, and being guided by the Spirit of the Lord, why we did what we did and why we should do what we're supposed to do today. So again, study this out, and next time we will pick it up with this very thought here.